heard two stories that continue our exploration into the place that it suggested that we arrive at when we no longer need to try. The first is a story about a man called Asily. Now, Asily was very poor, but from his meager earnings, he managed to amass a small amount of savings. But in the place and time in which he lived, there was nowhere that this money could be kept secure. But Asily did hear that there was a certain storekeeper in town who was said to be an honest man. So he took his savings to this storekeeper, asking him to keep it in safekeeping for him until it was needed. But as it happened, there came a time when Asily needed to take his funds back. But when he went to the storekeeper sent him away. "What? Never seen you before in my life. No, what are you talking about money? I know nothing about money." So Asily was totally heartbroken. He had no witnesses. There was no agreement taken into, nothing signed to say that he'd given over his money to this storekeeper. So he went back to his humble house, bewailing his fate, not knowing what he could do. There seemed no possibility of him finding a way to retrieve his hard-earned savings. But as it happened, he went up onto his roof, and he was beseeching and importuning God, "Please help me, I don't know what it is that I'm able to do, all my savings are gone." But at that very moment, a dervish came walking by and saw Asily on the roof, calling out to God. Now we know that dervishes, because of their dark and silent presence, are somewhat intimidating to some people. But not only intimidating, they draw fear from that presence, and even have the thought that these dervishes are evil beings putting the evil eye on you. And Asily was one of those beings, full of superstitions and having these thoughts. But the dervish, being a dervish, he said to Asily, "I know that you fear me and consider me to be evil, but I'm going to help you." So, as it happened, one day, Asily was standing outside the store of the storekeeper he'd given his money to, scratching his head and bewailing his fate, when the dervish came along and said, "Asily, I've been looking for you. I want to invite you to my house because I've decided to share with you my mystical secrets." Well, as it happened, of course, the storekeeper, being a curious man, had come to his door to see what was happening and overhear what was being said. But Asily just scratched his head because he knew nothing about mystical teachings. He didn't even know where the dervish lived. But they each went on their way. But the next day, the dervish came to Asily's house and said, "Well, how much did he give you?" And Asily said, "He gave me 5 times what I'd given to him to hold for me." Well, the dervish replied, "You see, Asily, sometimes what appears to be evil is really good, and sometimes that which is good is really evil. And sometimes appearances can be useful. And the second story is about a merchant, a very wealthy merchant who happened also to be of noble blood. And he had been with his Sufi sheikh for many, many years. And during that time, the sheikh had taught them about the nature of appearances and how they should be eschewed. But then one day, as it was with the merchant, because his trade took him all over to many places where he was welcomed into the courts and in the diplomatic circles. So there was an occasion when this merchant had one of those travels and happened to be invited to a grand reception by one of these grandees. And when he arrived at the reception, he looked, and to his very, very great surprise, there, sitting amidst a whole group of these nobles and others, was his master, with dreadlocks, beads all around his neck and amulets around his waist. And the merchant could not believe his eyes. He was his master who had taught for so many years about the nature of appearances and how they should be shunned, and here he was in all his splendor, sitting amongst this group of grandees holding court. So he couldn't wait until food was served and all the grandees went off, and he could get the ear of his sheikh master here. And he said, "Master, I can't believe it. I don't understand. What is it that's happening here?" And his sheikh said, "You see, to these people, I appear weird and somewhat unique. So I have their ear, which gives me the possibility to impart some seeds of awareness to them. Is this not the nature of appearances?" From your experience now, recognizing that our relationship with life changes when we arrive at that place where there's no longer any imposition of trying. What is our experience now relative to what it is that these two stories are indicating to us? What's your experience now in this world of appearances, vibrations, vibes as they're called, perceptions, awareness? In this place where our relationship with life has changed, what do these two stories invoke for you? Appearances, the nature of appearances. Why is it that the dervish says sometimes appearances can be useful?
Well, he was using appearance to fool the merchant and make him frightened so he give back the money. So he was using appearances in a good way, not to
You find now that there are some who are intimidated by your still presence, as the kind would say. What's your experience of this faith?